Another Big 12 expansion update, and this one you are going to like. It includes not 4 schools from the Pac 12, but how about 6? Oregon and Washington potentially in the mix. Welcome into the channel. I am John Kurtz. Here on this channel, we talk college football all week from a Big 12 slant. That obviously means a lot of conference realignment right now. Please do subscribe if you have not. I go live on Wednesdays and Sundays and sprinkle in content throughout the week as well. So here's the deal today. You guys know with Dennis Dodd's information, it has been a bit all over the place. 4 days ago, he was saying Big 12 sources said, why would we consider adding teams from the Pac 12, which seemed very peculiar at the time. Now he's come all the way back on the other side to drop this bombshell report today that the Big 12 is not just talking to Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, but that also Oregon and Washington are being discussed. So I'll just preface this discussion with take it with a grain of salt because Dennis Dodd has been, as I said, all over the place. And even going back to last year in conference realignment, not always very kind to the Big 12, sometimes information that seems to be inaccurate. And I'm not here to overly criticize anybody. I respect Dennis Dodd, but just take it with a grain of salt. But here is the report from CBS Sports. It says the Big 12 is involved in deep discussions to add multiple Pac-12 programs as a way to shore up its membership in the wake of the USC and UCLA defection to the Big 10. At least 4 teams are being considered, with the potential for the Big 12 to add more as realignment continues to shake out. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah were mentioned specifically as the teams being targeted by the Big 12, sources tell CBS Sports. There is also consideration of adding Oregon and Washington to make the Big 12 an 18-team league, the largest in the FBS. A merger of the Big 12 and Pac-12 in some form is also a possibility. Quote, everything is on the table, said one Big 12 source. There is, quote, no question the Big 12 has to be aggressive in expansion, another conference source said. Okay, so again, interesting and frustrating. You see the difference there in what one source supposedly said 4 or 5 days ago, which was why would we look at adding teams from the Pac-12, and now here it's emphatically we have to expand, we have to do this, which that seems to be the obvious and right play all along, whether someone was feeding incorrect information at first to try and hide, like smokescreen what's going on. I don't know, but the point is we're here now. And the other part about this is, in addition to it being a change from what Dennis Dodd's original report was, this piggybacks the report that we saw from Wildcat Authority, which is the Arizona 24/7 site, over the weekend, which is where we first learned, at least in some kind of official reporting, that the Big 12 was talking with Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. So now we do have that confirmed by a national source. And interestingly enough, somebody slid into my DMs and was talking to me the other day about, like, hey, it was just yesterday. It was last night, in fact, Sunday or Monday night, rather, and said, hey, is it bad that we haven't heard any national reports confirming what that Arizona site said? And I actually did stop to think about it. Like, yeah, I mean, it would make you feel better if you did. And typically when a site like that reports something like that, it then gets to the national sources if they've already been scooped by it. But here is somebody lending some credibility to that thought and that report in Dennis Dodd. But really the biggest part of all of this, I mean, I think we all knew and understood that, one, you can believe the Arizona report, and two, that all made sense. Arizona and Arizona State culturally, I think, have wanted out of the Pac-12, and there have always been rumors linking them to the Big 12. Utah, Colorado, obvious reasons why they would make sense. Colorado having been in the conference. Utah, natural rival with BYU, probably not going to find a home in the Big 10 quite obviously here if Oregon and Washington are not. But the big news in this story, really, if we're breaking it down to like the actual headline, that's that Oregon and Washington are being discussed within the Big 12. Now, the way that was framed in the report, I don't know if that is Oregon and Washington are reciprocating discussions, like there are discussions 2 ways happening here, or if it's just internally the Big 12 is now actually discussing it. Because look, the Big 12 should have been discussing it from the second that this happened, because there was obviously going to be a scenario where Oregon and Washington don't make it into the Big 10 and the Pac-12 still dissolves and they're going to need a home. The Big 12 is turning into the next best place potentially for that. I mean, the ACC has its own problems with that 14-year TV deal, and if they expand, that gets blown up. All those reasons kind of pointing you to the Big 12. So the Big 12 should have been talking about it the whole time. But even if it is merely that, just confirmation that the Big 12 has been discussing it internally, that's at least good. That's at least a step in the right direction. And I would think Oregon and Washington at least have to be self-aware enough right now to entertain those discussions to some degree. It may not be full attention. They may still feel like they're way, way, way above the Big 12, and that's fine. But the reality is they're going to have to start having those conversations whether they like it or not. And I think another piece of the puzzle here is what we're hearing about Notre Dame today. The scuttlebutt out on college football Twitter today was that Notre Dame is at least leaning towards saying no to the Big Ten if they have not already. And Dennis Dodd actually had a little bit about that in his story here, where he said Notre Dame's, quote, preference is to remain independent, according to Sports Illustrated. The possibility of earning $80 to $100 million in the Big Ten could impact that stance, but Notre Dame has left money on the table before, actually for decades. The Fighting Irish have historically valued their scheduling independence and one-of-a-kind marketing power. If Notre Dame stays independent, the attention is clearly on the Big 12 and Pac-12 in realignment, which makes sense because that starts to put the real pressure on Oregon and Washington there. The thought had kind of been, if Notre Dame wants to go, then maybe the Big Ten will just say, okay, Notre Dame, Stanford, Oregon, Washington, just go take everybody. Maybe it's Phil Knight that's going to subsidize some of that money to make everybody whole, to get Oregon and Washington into the fray as well. But if Notre Dame was going to say no, the general consensus has seemingly been that the Big Ten would just stand pat because nobody else is going to actually make them money. Again, from John Canzano, the massive Oregon columnist and radio host, huge media figure there, he had that column where he said the figure, the value, the dollar value for Oregon and Washington would be $60 million going to the Big Ten per year. And the threshold would be well over $130 million that you would need to hit. So they're not even close to actually adding value to the conference. So if the Big Ten now is saying no, and the Pac-12 is about to get 4 of the teams taken to the Big 12, what do you do if you're Oregon and Washington? Your options, again, are running out because the ACC locked into a 14-year deal with their TV contract to only make in the mid-30s in terms of TV payout per year, which is terrible, and they can renegotiate that and everything changes if they expand, which would free up teams to leave. And again, a lot of the buzz today, I saw Josh Pate actually saying that Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, the prevailing thought now seems to be they'll all just figure it out in court. They could go to the SEC if they want to, and they'll figure out the payment in court. So everything is moving toward Notre Dame saying no and staying put, and the SEC actually eventually going and poaching the ACC, which is leaving the Big 12 in a pretty good position to be perhaps the number 3 conference here and the last man left standing outside of the Big 10 and the SEC, which is crazy considering where we have been recently. Now, the possibility of a merger was mentioned there. And there is one tweet. Now, you can take this or leave it. This is much more loose as a source. But MHVER3 on Twitter, I feel silly even reading that to you. It's somebody that some put stock in terms of the information realignment-wise. I mean, there's a lot of stuff every day about realignment. I don't know what the sourcing actually is on this, but if you believe it, he had a tweet today that said the Big 12 terms for a merger were to keep their current 8 teams and 4 future members intact. The Pac-12 wanted BYU and UCF scrapped. Which, I mean, look, if the Pac-12 actually came to the table trying to negotiate some sort of merger and thought that they had any kind of leverage to dictate, like, hey, leave some of your teams out of this, I mean, LOL at that. The Pac-12 does not have leverage to be doing anything like that. Get on board or get the hell out, basically, right now to the Pac-12. That's all you have to do. Either way, everybody, even industry sources, whatever, even those in the industry who have been rather unkind to the Big 12 over the last year /5 to 10 years, seem to agree now. The consensus is the Big 12 is in a good spot. And now it seems like the door could be opening for Oregon and Washington, which, even if temporary, would be a massive, massive W for the Big 12. So, my friends, things seem to be moving in a pretty good direction right now. Thanks for watching the video. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I go live on Wednesday and Sunday nights. It's a lot of fun. Join this Big 12 community, this college football community. I would really appreciate it. You can support the channel on Venmo. It's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you'd like to do that. Follow me on Twitter at JLKurtz, and I will talk to you guys soon.